Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Today I'm going to talk to you about a label that's near and dear to my heart, and one that's very underserviced by the modern reissue programs. And it just goes to show, as I've said before, how much the reissue market is really going after the avant-garde fans, the free jazz fans, the hard bop fans. And if there's not elements of risk, and if the records aren't super rare and appealing to a certain demographic, it just seems like it's so much harder to get those titles reissued. And it just leads to the same stale titles being issued over and over again. A lot of it's great stuff, but it just constantly gets regurgitated, shrinking down the average jazz fan's perspective of the canon consistently. And it's just unfortunate. And part of the issue is a lot of those avant-garde free jazz records didn't sell. A lot of those labels had a very tough time staying around. So there's been a need to repress that stuff on some level because it was never very popular, and the originals are very rare, and so it drives up the cost and the demand. So there's market things that happen to make it so. But I still feel like there's some artificial creation of demand by publicizing some of these titles so much, and it's refreshing when I see people honestly reviewing stuff that they bought on Facebook and being honest about it. And it's not to say some people don't love difficult music, but again, there's that clear definition that I think we all need to remind ourselves all the time. The difference between something I like or love versus something being great. They're not the same thing. And we all think that we're experts. We all think that we're critics. And I feel like there's a humility that comes with actually knowing something, where you get to the point where, like, okay, just because I like something doesn't make it great. And I think with my jazz collection being where it is now, it's made me kind of have a more objective opinion on things. And I'm willing to have my own thought projections on labels and sounds and movements and periods of the music. I don't feel like I have to stick with the status quo. And records I once loved, I can now be like, well, I don't really love that as much as I thought I did. Bitches Brew being a great example. But I think it's very important to remind ourselves, just because I love something, it does not make it great. And I think that's so often a line that's not discerned. And I think people need to be able to be honest enough with themselves and the people who watch them, listen to them, follow them, to say, I love this. It may not be for everyone. And I think wine critics, beer critics, food critics, architecture, theater, movies, there's so much more honesty in most of those fields where they can say, this is a really great Cabernet that I love, but it might be a little much for some people. It might be too dry. It might be too spicy. It might have too much tannin. There needs to be that straightforward. And with the jazz community, there's so much, oh, this is awesome, we got to have it. John Coltrane, Love Supreme live in Seattle. It's a must-have. Insanity. It's insanity. And it's completely misled generations of jazz fans to the point of where 95% of the population wants nothing to do with the music or the people associated with the music, because all we ever do is talk about these super intense records that are so inaccessible to most people. And so that's partly why this label, ARGO, which made good, strong, black, blues-based, gospel-based, Southern Baptist jazz. And Chicago, the home of ARGO Records, who was created by Phil and Leonard Chess, who were the founders of the great blues label Chess Records. And they have several other imprints, Cadet, which is what ARGO became, Checker, Charlie, I think was the UK division of Chess. Just a large, huge body of work documenting the black migration. And again, to talk that history, the black migration from the South that happens between the wars largely, and continued after the Second War for sure. That great migration, a lot of them made it to Chicago and stayed there. And some went east from Chicago, into Dayton and Cleveland and Detroit and all the different urban areas along the Great Lakes. New York, of course, always attracted the musicians and the talent, and always had large black neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Harlem. So a lot of great jazz talent comes from New York. Boston, not so much. They didn't get up there very often. Philadelphia had a great black jazz neighborhood. DC and Baltimore, especially Baltimore. You'd think Baltimore would have a ton of great jazz talent. It's a pretty small list from Baltimore, and why that is, I don't know. I'm guessing part of it's they often just made the jump up to Philadelphia and then to New York. But making my trading cards, I think I've had 4 Baltimore natives, which is a pretty small number compared to Philadelphia, which is in the 60s. Detroit, Chicago are in the near 50. New York's probably getting close to 100. So the concentration of black talent in these urban neighborhoods, it's kind of shocking in a way how few places they're really allowed to live in and come from. All the white talent from across the jazz spectrum comes from all over the country. It's not limited to 1 or 2 or 5 locales. They can come from anywhere. Black people don't only come from a certain number of neighborhoods and areas where they were allowed to congregate with as little difficulty as possible in the poorest, most disassembled, shambled down, boarded up neighborhoods, places where the freeways cut through and left chunks of neighborhoods kind of isolated and blocked in. We'll let the blacks live there. It's still an awful story of forcing them to immigrate and migrate into certain pockets that we've kind of abandoned ourselves. And of course, then a white flight contributes even more to the cities kind of falling apart and not having a tax base and not being able to police themselves and run the school systems and keep the parks lit at night. And then with that comes the violence of the black market trying to create economics for themselves in a place where the manufacturing has abandoned them. It's an awful story that leads right into the hip-hop stories of the late 70s and early 80s and guys like Rakim and KRS-One telling us how the city streets were with the graffiti and the desperation and the music school systems taking the music out so that these guys didn't even know how to play instruments anymore. And that's kind of what leads to the rise of the turntable culture where they're cutting and mixing 2 records to create a loop and a beat off a favorite Kool and the Gang record. Like, the hip-hop comes out of that burden of economic inequality. We don't longer have trumpets and trombones and pianos, and those things left inner city schools a long time ago with the music programs. And hip-hop was an obvious adjustment to that. So Chicago has this huge black neighborhood, and it's one of the great melting pots of the African American diaspora and all the various subgenres of that. This Caribbean cultures are leaking into the Chicago area. A lot of Eastern Europeans are flooding into Chicago. It's just an incredible homogenous pot of humanity. And the Chess Brothers stepped into that mix and recorded blues for the 40s into the 80s, I believe. And at one point in the mid-50s, they realized they had enough talent around them and were meeting enough black musicians through the blues that there was a ton of jazz artists that they felt they could record. And so they created a separate label. And they initially named their sub-label Marteri, which was a reference to, I think it was Phil Chess's kids, Philip and Mark. And there it is, Marteri LP number 601. And that's the very first ARGO record was this Al Hibbler record, Marteri 601. And it's a label that has a very short shelf span. There it is, the Marteri imprint. Not something you see every day. And for reasons I can't remember, they switched it to ARGO for the next release, 602. And Marteri is no longer for this world. So I think this is the only Marteri album put out by the Chess brothers. And here is the ARGO version of the same album. You know, packaged with different font, different cover, but it's still 601. 601. And HIBBLER, of course, was kind of a legend in the black community. He didn't cross over quite like some of the stars of like Billy Eckstine and some of those other singers. But HIBBLER had a stint with the great Ellington bands of the 40s. And a couple of my favorite songs he sings. I Don't Get Around Much Anymore. Love that song. Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me. One of my favorite songs. Those songs both really stir my drink. I love those tracks. And his rich voice is just fantastic. Reminiscent somewhat of a Billy Eckstine. Really rich, some vibrato. I'm a big Al HIBBLER guy, and I think he really fit well in that Ellington band. But of course, he goes on to having some of his own success as a leader, singing for Decca, singing for ARGO. He's a record at Atlantic in the 50s. And again, I don't think he was ever as popular as Sammy Davis Jr. or like some of the other singers that were out there. But he certainly made his mark and was important for his Ellington period alone. That's enough. So 601 is the first record I would reissue. And I would probably repackage it as that Marteri logo and font, just to kind of be genuine to the original history of the story. And so ARGO gets launched in probably late 55, maybe early 56, meaning there's no 10-inch material for ARGO. And there is just a glut of great talent in Chicago that Phil and Leonard Chess are just running through their studio and churning stuff out. And from my friend Scott Baldwin told me, who's a Chicago native and fairly knowledgeable about Chicago scenes and the underbelly, a lot of the time they just got these guys in the studio late at night, where studio time was very cheap. And so these sessions were thrown together middle of the night and turned out quickly and as low budget as possible. Phil and Leonard Chess were known for not treating their artists particularly well. Racism was still rampant in the country, and they treated their artists kind of like indentured servants almost. Like it wasn't a great relationship. Yet, they still empowered and gave careers to a lot of young black talent. So in the blues story, the number of blues cats, from Buddy Guy to Howlett Wolf to Muddy Waters to John Lee Hooker, like the blues legacy of Chess is impeccable. It's just incredible. It's the blue note of the blues, if you will. But ARGO also has a great art roster of artists and a great catalog of records. It goes from about 601 to about 750, and they have to switch the name to Cadet because there was a British classical theatrical label called ARGO that they were kind of in competition with. Even though they were totally separate subgenres of art and music, they still decided to go with the Cadet name. So the name switches around 750 to Cadet. A lot of titles in that area especially will show up as both ARGO and Cadet pressings. And then most ARGO titles will have a Cadet later reissue. And so you can get those early 600s, early 700 titles as Cadet pressings, usually for a fraction of the cost. Sometimes they reissue that stuff with black and white covers. The original artwork with a black and white cover. They were kind of tight money-wise. And that incredible legacy, that incredible story is often really underdocumented today. And that's funny because like the Chess blues records, I feel like those have stayed in print consistently over the years. But a lot of the ARGO stuff really gets overlooked. And you see certain titles at times out there. And there's a separate Argo sequence that's called the 4000 sequence. And that's got some more singers like Etta James in it. And Etta James, of course, at last, she has those big hits that are kind of those blues, R&B, gospel crossover. And we'll talk about a gutsy little woman. I wouldn't want to have crossed Etta James. That's a bad bag of wool. I mean, she'll wrap you up and knit you tight. You'll be done, cleaned up. But those records are in print. I do see Etta James stuff in record stores today. And I do see the occasional ARGO reissue. But I looked on Amazon last night. I didn't see anything currently being offered. So I'm hoping most of the stuff's not available right now. I'm not positive. Again, I didn't dig super deep on that front. I'm pretty sure the ARGO Al Hibbler / Marteri Al Hibbler is not available anywhere. And it's a great place to start. And again, Al is just an important part of the jazz story and is a great voice. And some of his post-Ellington work does tend to be a little bit saccharine, honestly. I think that's partly the doing of a lot of the record labels that sign him. And again, it was pretty commonplace for these guys to be overly steered into the sounds and shapes and looks that they were going to present to white America. And the Blue Notes, who didn't interfere with that stuff, that was the exception. The Savoy Lubinskis, the Chess Brothers, if that was more common here, these guys would be really kind of, even Norman Granz, for all the positivity he did, he was still very controlling and told Ella Fitzgerald what she was going to sing, what key she was going to sing in it. And so the freedom that we think these black jazz musicians had isn't as broad a stroke as we would like to think it is. And some labels offered it more than others. I think Riverside was pretty good with their artists. Prestige was pretty good in the fact that Bob Weinstock wasn't super interested in having a lot of oversight. Argo had a great talent, arranger, producer, art director named Esmond Edwards. And he was an important part of the Argo story for a long time. And I'm going to show you, I think, 18 titles. I think we're going to do 18 again. Argo records that I think deserve a reissuing. And again, I think it was Fresh Sounds maybe that did do some of these out of Spain. And I've tried to not do too many of those titles. The Sandy Mosse, I know, was fresh sounded. I know there's a number of them that were. But there's a lot of Argo titles that have very little representation. In fact, there's at least a dozen Argo titles that have never been reissued that I know of. And it makes their originals very expensive for a label that's not super expensive. And we'll jump to 604 right now. And this is a record that took me literally 2 years to track down a copy of it. And I finally gave up and bought an imported Fresh Sound copy from, I think it was Italy, maybe Austria. And with shipping, I ended up paying like $50. And I was like, at least I got it. And it had the alternate cover, which I'm not crazy about the alternate cover. I should probably show it to you. That would be the alternate cover. The great Pinky Winters, who does some work with Zoot Sims as well. But this is this outstanding record. And then shortly after I got that one in the mail, this one turned up in Chicago on Discogs. And that's the original cover. Her in an outdoor waterfront setting. Number 604. This has the great Howard Roberts on it, the great West Coast guitar player. Who else? Chico Hamilton. And Gerald Wiggins, the great West Coast pianist, is on this as well. And this also has an early Argo label that you don't see very long on the label. It's got the old ship on there for the Argonauts. I'm actually from Toronto, and Toronto has a pro football team named the Argonauts. And of course, Jason and the Argonauts is where that all comes from. But this is an outstanding record. She sings a very sincere blues, and she doesn't have to fabricate it or try too hard. A lot of white gals fall short when it comes to singing the blues. Pinky Winter nails it. And it was one of those records where you didn't want to spend too much because you didn't know if you were going to like it that much. And if I had known how great it was, I probably wouldn't have been as hesitant to spend more. But I got that one, I think, for $65 plus shipping, which meant like $70 from Chicago. And it's really one of the highlights of my collection. It's a great record. I've listened to it many times. And one of the ultimate measuring sticks of how much you like a record isn't how great other people say it is. It's how often do you listen to it. You know, I think that's the epiphany you come to at some point. Is great isn't what you read. Great's what you like and put on all the time. And so that's what's good to you. And that's why great is such a difficult thing to quantify. So many of the experts are just echoing the experts that they read when they were young. You know, so there becomes this echo chamber, repetitious cycle of the same things. And great, again, it's not liking something doesn't make it great. It's a very separate set of rules that make something great. Something great should be accessible to a lot of people. You see what I'm saying? The 57 Chevy, that was great. And a lot of people could afford it. A good cheeseburger, that's great. Most people can enjoy that. A nice Pilsner with a nice clean hint of citrus, nice heft in the grain. Most people can enjoy a fine Pilsner. Imperial stouts, barley wines, that's the bit, you might love it. But to say this barley wine's great, you're going to lose more people than you're going to gain with that depiction. You're better off saying this is really intense and not going to be for most people, but if you want to try something really crazy, try this barley wine. You might win more people that way. They'll go into it with the honest expectation of this being a lot. And if they drink it and go, oh, whoo, I made it through, where's my badge of honor? But this deception that something's great, it just needs to be re-quantified. And again, there's a humility that comes, I think, with that. Having collected so many records and been doing it so long, eventually you look at the things that you've been told your whole life. This is great. I don't like it. This is what I like. And so I often share what I like without trying to be like, oh, this is just great. I won't go on it anymore, but I think it's an important discernment. Number 607 is the Norman Simmons Trio. A great piano player filled with the blues. He has a short career as a recording artist, spends years as a teacher, and I've actually chatted with a few people who were taught by him. I guess he was just a gentleman and a scholar. This is a rare record, ARGO 607, and it's completely deserving of a nice reissue. Those photos alone could lend to a nice Tone Poet style gatefold, although ARGO records weren't gatefolds. That was not what they did. But again, the gatefold doesn't really come into play on a regular basis until Impulse and Verve, and then it becomes more of a standard thing. But in the 50s, gatefold wasn't really part of the landscape. Love Norman Simmons, and I actually could use a better copy of that. That copy's very good at best, and but I don't think I've seen another one. So I want to stumble across and collecting ARGO for 10 years. Number 609. And I'm always going to go heavy towards the earlier days of the label, often in part because these are the ones that are usually the hardest to find, and the later stuff on the Cadet had wider distribution. Chess had pretty good distribution compared to a Blue Note, but there's the ARGO label from the classic era. This is brought to us by Sandy Mosse, Ira Schulman, Eddie Baker. Ira Schulman is a great sax player who has a record at Bethlehem on the 10-inch era. I love that cover. The Blue Note, of course, is that Chicago club, the Preview Club, the London House, where a lot of famous stuff was recorded. It's showing you a lot of the Chicago area jazz clubs. Sadly, mine has the masking tape on it, but as my friend Scott Baldwin can attest to, a hard record to find. And because the demand isn't super high for these records, you can find these when you do find them for 50 to $100, and that might have changed a little bit since I bought these, but I still search record stores all the time, and so I'm always kind of noticing what stuff's going for nowadays. And there's not a lot of Argo titles that will go for over $100, and stuff like this in good condition might hit 70, 80, $100 maybe, but again, they are really rare. I got this one out of Tennessee off of eBay. I think I won the auction for 30-ish, again with the tape on it, but the record's perfect, so I can live with it. But again, a record that definitely could use a nice reissue. I want to do these. I think I actually pulled 20 if I remember now. I think about it. And I think we're going to do them in 4 sets of 5 Jazz Shepherd records. We're going to issue 4 sets of 5 with these Argo titles. This is a great player. I think he's out of Chicago area, if I remember. He serves John Young, a fantastic piano player. Plays with some of the roots of the boogie woogie, which was out of Chicago, but he's also got a lot of gospel and a lot of blues in him. But again, that's the entire black lexicon that's led up to this point being shadowed in what he's playing. That's not uncommon. It's not uncommon to have the roots of the music that you're playing in be a part of your own sound. That's pretty commonplace. John was a great player. I think he has 3 records total at Argo, maybe 4. And I think he has a record at Delmark, another great Chicago label by Bob Coster. But you don't see John Young's titles very often. And this is his first one, number 612. And he plays with the trio most of the time. And the trio's fairly anonymous in terms of our recognition of the names. Herbert Brown on the bass, Larry Jackson on the drums on this one. I think the membership shuffles a little bit at times. But one of the great Chicago piano players. And again, Chicago, making my trading cards, there's a lot of great talent that comes out of Chicago. And it's second tier in fame, second city in reputation, but it's not second city in ability, talent, or playing whatsoever. This is top of the mark stuff. And so it's not like you're in a mid-sized city where you're just taking who's available. You can pick from a litany of talent because the nightclubs were filled with great players. The local bars were filled with great players. So the Chess Brothers could literally pick. It wasn't out of desperation where they hired anybody. There was a lot of black talent in Chicago for them to sift through and suss out the best stuff. And they really do a great job of that. This is James Moody. And James Moody is one of the signature players and names of the early Argo period. Along with Ramsey Lewis and along with Ahmad Jamal, who shows up here in a little bit, Argo was partly successful because of James Moody. And James Moody had a big hit with Moody's Mood for Love. And it was a song he did in the 40s, if I remember, that was kind of a rhythm and blues, early jump blues, crossover. I think it was a King Pleasure who, man, I can't remember exactly, but James Moody ends up kind of redoing that song and having pretty big success with it. And he brings it to Argo, and this became a fairly popular single as well for them at this point. I think he records it twice, maybe 3 times over the years. But Moody was a great flautist, a great sax player, a lot of blues and gospel in his sound. He's a precursor to guys like Yusef Lateef in a way, just in terms of how he can play some edge and dynamics and hints of avant-garde at times, but he's much more rooted in the blues, and he makes a lot of recordings for Argo, maybe 10 albums, and they're great records. And you can get James Moody's Argo stuff for usually $8 to $20 in great condition. And he's a great player, one of the true legends. He lived into an old age, so he was around telling stories about the music for a long time. Moody does do some recordings for Blue Note early on in the 10-inch era. He makes some recordings for Prestige that come out on Prestige. I think mostly in 10-inch era originally, but then he also gets some stuff reissued in the LP era at Prestige. And he has at least 3 or 4 titles in the 7,000 sequence at Prestige, which has probably kept his name more alive than the Argo titles have, in spite of his success that he had at Argo. So you have to include James Moody, because he was integral in the success of the Argo label. Now we're going to show you number 620, and this is the first of the Daddy-O Presents. And Daddy-O Day was a black Chicago radio personality. And if he got behind you in your music, you had a pretty good chance of having a successful record. And he was a big time, like a morning talk show personality of the 80s or 90s. He was that in the black community in the 50s. And promoted shows and events, and was just a real personality on the Chicago scene. And he works with Phil and Leonard Chess to present 4 records under his own kind of tutelage and guidance, and somewhat even production, if I remember. And this is, of course, the great Clark Terry, St. Louis native, one of the great trumpet players of this later era. He plays with both Basie and Ellington. And if you watch that last episode with Jean-Michel, he tells the story of how Ellington kind of pried Clark Terry away from Count Basie in spite of their gentleman's agreement to not pilfer each other's bands. But he offered Terry to go home for like 2 or 3 months and paid his salary to stay home so that he could have him join the orchestra without stirring too many feathers in the Basie camp. Just a great trumpet player, very modern. He fits in with all the things that are happening in the hard bop scene in the 50s. Daddy-O Day for WMAQ NBC Chicago. Holmes Daddy-O Day Daily. I just saw who was on this band the other day, and now I don't see it on this record. I was talking with this record with someone, and I must have had it pulled up on Discogs. It's a good band. I think it's mostly Ellington guys with him. Great record. And this is a tough record to find. Never been reissued that I know of. And this is one of those ones that you can pay $100, maybe $200 for. Clark Terry on a limb. Daddy-O Presents. Classic Argo. Next thing I want to reissue was this MGT Plus 3. Again, Daddy-O Daily Presents, right there, Daddy-O. The MJT was a Walter Perkins, the drummer, organization of musicians. The lineup kind of changes with most of the releases. VJ, also out of the Chicago area, records, I think, 3 Walter Perkins MJT3 records. But the first one here is at Argo in 1956. And it's got the great Paul Serrano on the trumpet, the fantastic Nicky Hill, who's an alto sax player out of New Jersey, but made most of his living in Chicago with the Ira Sullivans and the MJT3 guys. Walter Perkins is on the drums. Richard Abrams on the piano, a guy you don't hear a lot from. And then a young Bob Cranshaw is on the bass. And Cranshaw, of course, plays bass at Blue Note and Prestige. He's in the scene for a long time. And Perkins records drums as a session drummer across the jazz canon for a long time. Nicky Hill sadly disappears too soon, and there's not a lot of information on Nicky Hill even out there. That's the only photograph I can even find of the guy. I wanted to make a trading card of him, but I can't really use that photo with the pink trim. It just looks ridiculous. And then Paul Serrano has a couple of great records at Riverside. That's a great record. It's very modern. It's propulsive, young. Again, Clifford Brown, Max Roach impact. That's what's being heard in the jazz scene. That's what the cutting edge is. And it's no different in the rap scene today. When someone comes up with something fresh and new, everyone's like, oh shit, we got to get on that. And there's a lot of propulsion, a lot of energy, a lot of aggression on that. Number 623, another Chicago native, Max Roach. And Max doesn't make his entire living in Chicago. He's in New York, on the West Coast. He plays with Howard Rumsey for a while. Like, Max is all over the place. But he's a Chicago native. And he, of course, he works with Clifford Brown and that incredible ensemble in 54, 55. And then after Clifford passes, he brings in Kenny Dorham and Sonny Rollins, takes Harold Land's place. Numerous other trumpet players, Booker Little, come through his groups. Max is just a real institution and one of the hard driving forces in the music, artistically, spiritually, culturally. He's a force for change, a force for recognizing the times we live in, and he's got a lot of political and social aspirations that we'll see at his stuff at Candid and other stuff coming later at Impulse. A real important figure. And this is early Max Roach. And Hank Mobley's on this with him. And that's part of what makes this record tough to find. Because the Mobley fans will find everything Mobley's on and drive up the costs of those records. Kenny Dorham is also on this record. And so you have kind of a Blue Note level record of intensity with just great players. And who's the bass player? George Morrow, who plays with him with Clifford Brown, of course. And then Ramsey Lewis is on the piano. And Ramsey's one of the most talented players of any era. But again, when you have Kenny Dorham, when you have Hank Mobley, when you have Max Roach, Ramsey Lewis, it's just the talent level. George Morrow, it's right there. It's part of the Max Roach story. This happens 56, shortly after the Rollins Dorham era. Like, this is Argo on the cutting edge. This is where jazz was in 56. The Blue Note hard bop sounds coalescing as this is taking place in Chicago. And this actually might not have been recorded in Chicago. I don't remember. They don't always say. Perhaps it was, though, and it says Max Roach appears courtesy of Mercury, Dorham appears courtesy of Riverside, and Hank Mobley appears courtesy of Blue Note Records. So all the aforementioned talent were all guest artists, essentially. Awesome stuff. Fire-filled. That's a potent brew. Then the great Johnny Griffin, another Chicago native, a guy that was winning Chicago talent battles for years. The guy could shred. He had just incredible nimble dexterity. And again, when Louis Armstrong came along, everyone wanted to play like Louis. When Charlie Parker came along, everyone wanted to play like Charlie. When Clifford Brown ascends, everybody wanted to start playing like Clifford Brown. And his lyrical, tumultuous playing, Johnny Griffin, always has that tonality that's centered with melodic thought process happening. That's a Clifford Brown push. And Griffin is one of the most dexterous players on the tenor. And shortly after this, he goes to New York and makes his 3 Blue Notes with Coltrane and all that host of talent. And those Griffin Blue Notes are highly treasured. But this is before that with Junior Mance on the piano, a great Detroit piano player, the great Wilbur Ware, who's a Chicago native, and Buddy Smith on the drums, a guy I can't tell you much about. That needs to be reissued. Although I think this one may be in print recently. I remember seeing that being available not too long ago. Another Daddy-O presents here, Paul Gonsalves. And Paul Gonsalves is a great, great tenor player. Spent a long time in the Ellington Orchestra. And he might have also played with Basie for a while, too, if I remember. But Gonsalves is a great lyrical player whose solo career didn't take off like I think most people thought it would have. Impulse gives him a chance to record a few things. Argo gives him a chance to record a few things. There's another label he records something for at that period. I'm drawing a blank right now. But again, this is one of those ones that's never been reissued that I know of. And it's got Willie Jones on the piano, Jimmy Wood on the bass, Clark Terry on the trumpet, Sam Woodger on the drums. Recorded August 6, 1957. And so that's mostly Ellington alumni that he's recording with. And again, this is one of those Argos that can push up near 100, 200 bucks. It's got enough demand for it, and great cover, by the way. and it's got enough demand for it with there being few copies that it does drive the price up. Daddy-O presents number 627. This is the fourth, I think the last one he does. And this is Ramsey Lewis, then his Gentleman of Jazz. And Ramsey makes a career for Argo. He really is the guy that keeps Argo fluent economically for decades. He's making hit records in the 70s. And then he finally moves on to Columbia in the mid-70s. But he's at Argo for a long time. And his rhythm section are famous in and of itself. The Holt Young, Red Holt and L.D. Young. This is recorded in February of 58. So Argo doesn't put out a ton of titles in 56, 57, 58, into 59. We're at 627 and we've already done 3 years in the Argo catalog. It's not till probably around 650, where we hit 59, 60, 61, 62. They start having more releases every year. It was quite sporadic initially, but it allowed them to promote the records they did have out and the artists they did have out, and it was just the path they chose. And again, they're also doing all the blues stuff at Chess, which always seems to take priority over what's happening at Argo. I don't think the Argo gets half of the promotion that the Chess stuff was getting. A great cover, beautiful, laminate, old 50s press, interesting graphics, Sheldon Recording Studios. Just love it. Love the smell, the whole part of the vintage records. It's just wonderful to me. And here's Ahmad Jamal. This is not his first, but it's probably one of the records that really put him on the map, but not for me, 628. And Ahmad is a very important player. He's a minimalist. He eliminates notes in his head before he plays them. And will play kind of sparse, ghost-like sounds at times, and just well-spaced melody. And Miles Davis actually attributes Ahmad Jamal as being one of the guys that helped him find his sound. Miles' approach to minimalism, which kind of comes to Miles in the mid-50s, that's part of him hearing Ahmad. And of course, Ahmad comes from Count Basie and from others as well. But Ahmad was a real artsy player who had a unique approach. He was never trying to fill your ears with sounds. He was trying to fill your mind with thoughts and feelings. And just one of the great talents and another mainstay of Argo. It's really Ahmad Jamal and Ramsey Lewis that keep the Argo label alive as long as it was. And they make records both for the label for, 15 years. And you gotta love Ahmad Jamal, just an important piece of the canon. And this one may have been reissued already, but it's also a record that sold pretty well for them. This is a record that I think I might have seen a reissue on, but I'm adding it anyway. 634, Lateef, Yusef Lateef, live at Cranbrook, which was a college, I think somewhere between Chicago and Detroit, if I remember. And this is a later pressing of this. And the originals of this also go for really good money. Number 634, with William Austin on the bass and Frank Gant on the drums, Frank Morelli on the baritone sax, and the great Terry Pollard on the piano. And Terry Pollard was a female pianist, vibraphonist, who was a great 10-inch in Bethlehem. And of course, Yusef is also a Detroit native like Terry was. And so I'm guessing that Yusef and Terry played together in Detroit for a while. And whether Frank Gant and William Austin are from Detroit or not, I'm not certain. But again, this is a live record. Certainly a tough Argo to come by. And Yusef has kind of become a much bigger name in jazz today than he was at the time. He was kind of part of the Detroit scene. He was introducing world sounds. Even on this record, you have a few instruments that are finger cymbals, the rebab, a gong. You know what I mean? So he's already kind of challenging convention of sound. And he's going to go to Savoy after this and start creating that world jazz sound he's renowned for. 655, this is a Japanese pressing of this. This is a hard record to find original pressings of. Kenny Burrell live at the Village Vanguard in New York. A great record. I'm a huge Kenny Burrell fan. I like anything Kenny Burrell's on. He adds color and character. And I can't tell you the band because it's all written in Japanese. Probably the only Japanese Argo I have. And probably the only one I needed to get from Japan. And again, even the Gonzalez and the Clark Terrys, I've never seen Japanese pressings of those. And the Japanese do so much of the canon, but they haven't done those titles. That one was done by the Japanese, of course. And anything Burrell, I'm all about. Sonny Stitt, you could really pick a lot of Sonny Stitt, excuse me, from Argo. He makes a lot of music for the Argo label. Kind of a cool cover. You see a little match, and it's called Sonny Stitt Burnin'. And this is a promo white label Argo pressing of this. And Sonny Stitt's one of the great legends of the alto and the tenor, and comes from the bebop school, was very much a Parker protege, but then kind of really finds his own sound, especially once he switches to the tenor. And he records for Argo in 3 different sessions, 3 different periods, I should say. He's got some stuff early, 55, 56 probably, and then he comes back in 57, 58, does a couple more titles, and he goes on some other, it's back to Verve, I think, and then like 60, 61, he comes back and makes 4 or 5 more titles for Argo. So he's one of the most important artists at Argo, and I just picked this one because I like the cover a lot. I think most of his work at Argo is outstanding. Sonny Stitt's the Lone Wolf, as he was called, and his body of work is really tough to get the grasp on. It seems like he's only recording 1 or 2 album record deals with these labels. So he's recording for Verve, Argo, and Roost, all kind of simultaneously. And he'll go to Roost, make a record or 2, and then sign a contract with Verve, do 2 or 3 records there, and then I'll go to Argo, make a few records. And of course, the labels don't put stuff out all right away. So in 1957, you might have 5 Sonny Stitt records on 3 different labels. And so it's a lot of confusing. It's not like he was here, then went there, and then the label just slowly released the stuff like a Jimmy Smith. It's much more him just piecemealing his contracts and never being obligated to one place for too long. But you gotta love Sonny Stitt, a great player. You'll hear a lot of intensity, a lot of blues. He really can play up-tempo bebop stuff with the best of them. His battles with guys like Johnny Griffin and Gene Ammons are quite famous. You gotta love Sonny Stitt. Laura's Alexandria, number 663. Her early work is on the King label out of Cincinnati, which then re-headquartered in Chicago. And I'm guessing that's how she kind of became affiliated with Chess and Argo, where she does, I think, 4 records, early 60s. All of them are outstanding. I picked this first one with the Ramsey Lewis Trio backing her, and some of Basie's Cats. See that? Some of Basie's Cats. And this is just outstanding black life experience, telling you the stories of how things are. Recorded in the 60 at Termar Recording Studios. And Termar is that kind of, remember Marteri? Named after his kids? Well, Termar is the inverse of that, named after his children. Got Joe Newman, a Basieite, Frank West, a Basieite, Al Gray, a Basieite, Frank Foster, Freddie Green. So some pretty big time Basie talent. Newman, Gray, West, Foster, Freddie Green. And then, of course, all the young Red Holt and Ramsey Lewis. So outstanding. Loraz Alexandria. One of the singers I love a lot. And she's so bluesy and jazz oriented. that she didn't get tucked away on the 4000 sequence. Her records are all here in the 600 sequence. So a real talented singer. I think this is number 18. And you could have picked anything from these guys. The Jazztet. One of the great hard bop, late 50s, early 60s innovations at ARGO. This group was outstanding with Curtis Fuller right there. There's Fuller. Then you have Art Farmer on the trumpet. And then, of course, the great Benny Golson on the tenor. I think, Addison Farmer, the twin of Art Farmer on the bass. And then on the piano is McCoy Tyner at a very young age. And then Lex Humphreys, who I remember as a New York drummer, is on the drums back there. So this is just a great quintet. This still has its original wax sleeve on it. Beautiful old ARGO label. This group is a hard bop group in the purest sense of the terms of that word. And all the records they do for ARGO at this point are just outstanding. This was the first one, Meet the Jazztet. And again, Blue Note famous names on a label that doesn't have that same popularity. So it tells you a lot about how great that record and all those Jazztet records are. And I would definitely reissue that. Al Gray. I had to include an Al Gray record. Again, that's a promo copy. Al Gray was a fantastic trombone player. And when you want bebop, you think of J.J. Johnson. When you want just incredible, dexterous, viscous, smooth playing, you want Jimmy Cleveland, okay, on the trombone in this era. If you want every trick in the book, you want Al Gray. And Al Gray can play a tempo. Al Gray can sing and croon with that trombone, mimic the human voice almost. But if you want guttural utterances, laughing, screeching, honking, blurting, percussive stumbling, there's things he does with his trombone and his embouchure that rattle my teeth listening to it. There's nobody like Al Gray. And there's almost a sense of comedy to what he plays at times. And not in a lighthearted sense, but just like you chuckle to yourself that a guy just did that with a trombone. If you ever play with a trombone, it's not easy. It's not just like slide trombone takes some work. But you give him a mute and a good piece of the blues, he will shake down some timbers. Just a fun player, energetic player. I've chatted with his son a lot in Philadelphia. What a legacy, what a character and personality as well. And I think the personality really jumps through in Al's play. You know, and he was a womanizer, which a lot of these guys were. He got arrested on tour in Europe for supposedly impregnating a woman and not paying his child support. He had other issues with the law over the years. He was a real character, Al Gray. And one of my favorite personalities of jazz in the 60s. And of course, he's a firm member of the Count Basie Orchestra Firmament. He's a star in that band. He's one of the guys that when he stands up and puts that that plunger to his trombone, the audience goes nuts. Al Gray was an incredible personality. And he stays on the scene a long time and plays into his old age and has children all over the world from the sounds of it. But that's part of leaving your legacy. And he left his legacy on vinyl at ARGO with I think 6 titles, maybe 7. All of them are great. And you can find all those Al Gray titles for cheap compared to like a guy like Curtis Fuller. His records go for next to nothing compared to Curtis Fuller. And he's a more interesting player than almost any other trombone player you can think of. Tricky Sam Nanton is in that same lineage. Just a guy that will please you and make your ears happy. You talk about ear candy. There's things that Al Gray does that are just like hysterically wonderful. And I'm going to leave it at that. The last record I'm going to show you, I think it's number 20, is number 678, Art. And this is a record I know has been reissued once or twice. but I can't not have it part of the Jazz Shepherd reissue ARGO program. Great self-portrait. I don't know if it's a self-portrait, but a great portrait of Art Farmer, getting into his twin brother Addison Farmer, who died mysteriously. I think in his sleep. He had sudden death syndrome kind of thing happened. That was kind of unexplained. Great lineup is on this. Termar Studios. Oh, actually, this is Nola Pinto Studios in New York. Art Farmer, Tommy Flanagan, Tommy Williams, and Albert Heath. The cover paintings by Ernest Fine. Tommy Nola's the engineer. Supervision Jack Tracy. Great Art Farmer record. And he has a couple records at ARGO that are all worth seeking out. And this is a beautiful, pristine copy. You can still see the beautiful laminate, old, original pressing. And I got this probably 15 years ago at a record store. And at the time, I think I paid $15 for it, which was a lot for a secondhand record. And that's a record now that pushes $100 as well, because there's a lot of Art Farmer fans out there. And so that's the Jazz Shepherd reissue program for ARGO. And again, there's another, I got to 678. And so all these records are in that first 6 or 7 years of the ARGO history. And I think the stuff after that becomes easier to find. I really do. It's that early stuff that's really difficult to come by. And so I hope y'all enjoyed that. I hope when the Jazz Shepherd record company comes together, y'all are buying these reissues. And again, with ARGO, go out there and dig. A lot of times you'll find these in dollar bins. Record store owners only know what they know. And oftentimes they're not jazz fans. They own record stores. They love the Beach Boys, or they love the Beatles. They love rock and roll, classic rock. They love artsy, R&M, The Cure. Each record store guy has his own niche of stuff he loves. And then the other stuff that he sells it based on what he knows. And so any record store owner that's owned a record store for any length of time knows that Blue Note is valuable and collectible. And so you're not going to go into a record store and find Blue Note in the dollar bin unless it's beat to shit. They just know. The Blue Note name is too big. The reissue programs remind them all the time. ARGO slips under the radar. So there can be record stores that have fairly good reputations that don't value ARGO records. There's not the demand, there's not the knowledge, there's not the exposure. And so these records can slip under the noses of a lot of record store clerks, a lot of record store checkout people who grade the stuff. And I've seen a lot of ARGO records in the shelves and dollar bins at record stores for $1 to $5. And then a lot of them, almost all of them, come for under $20. Some of the ones I've shown you can get more expensive, but again, they're there, and that's why this reissue program needs to be. Because I want to put these out there for $25. Beautiful quality audio recordings, hopefully from the analog tapes, if those are still out there. I'm not sure on that. But ARGO, what a great label. Y'all have a great day. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you want to support the channel, please go to my Patreon and pledge your support, a few bucks a month. It all helps out. And we appreciate all of you guys who are supporting at this point. And stay tuned. Lots of great content coming down the road. I got a new box of stuff from Japan I want to show you guys. And I also just reorganized my record shelves. And I put a bunch of new labels up. Added probably almost 20 labels to the shelves. And I had to take my 10-inch records out of the cabinet back there. And I had to put them in with all the rest of the records. Because when the coffee shop opens up, I need to use that thing for hoodies and t-shirts, and we got to maximize our space. So my 10 inches got absorbed into the rest of the collection. I'm going to do an episode showing you that realignment, which I'm pretty excited about. It's nice seeing the Bethlehem 10 inches with the 12 inches. It's nice seeing the Roost 10 inches, Storyville 10 inches with the 12 inches. So I'm going to show you that coming up soon as well. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. Peace.